Welcome, everybody, to our panel discussion on the lessons learned in cloud transformation. We're grateful that you could all take some time and join us today. I'm Devlin Liles, the president of Improving's Houston office, and I'll be your host and moderator. I'll be asking questions of each of the panelists and would encourage you to do so as well. In the Q&A feature on the side of your screen, there's a button to submit a question, and then there's a list of those questions that will be published out that you can upvote or not. We'll be using a mixture of prepared questions and those from the audience. Now, introducing our panel, I'm joined by some great leaders in the technology and business space today. We have Barrett Cousins, the president of Vantage Software. Barrett leads an organization bringing near real-time digital twins and machine learning into the reliability space. Jay Spears, VP of Information Technology for CEC Entertainment. Jay has led multiple companies through digital transformations, modernizations, cloud adoptions as the head of each IT organization. And Rich McCraw. Rich is the VP of Technology for Improving, one of our most experienced thought leaders in the space of cloud technologies and consulting. Welcome to each of you. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to dive right into the discussion. So Rich, I want to start with you. With the spread of technologies, acronyms, and jargon in the cloud space today, can you give kind of a simple summary of where somebody should look and learn first if they're trying to understand the space?
Yeah, I think for someone who's looking more at a high level to understand how to leverage the cloud, really one of the things you want to focus on is not to zero in on any one product or platform, but instead to understand the type of cloud solutions, infrastructure, platform, or software as a service, and understand what that transformation means rather than any one technology. As you dive a bit deeper, I think that really becomes an even more important lesson as taking any cloud technology and learning to do a hello world, right? Learning the intro to technology doesn't really get you much further in understanding what's different about the cloud than really anything else will. And one of the things about the cloud specifically is it moves at a pace that we've probably never seen in the release of new features, new functionality, and new platform. And so if you try to learn the magic solution for today, it will be outdated by tomorrow. It will be outdated in 3 months. But the underlying fundamental ways those solutions work and what makes the cloud solutions different really evolve along with the platforms. So if you can focus on not, did I learn AWS's solution for data? Or did I learn Azure's solution for hosting Docker? But instead understand what containerization, what scalability, what's data parallel versus task parallel. That applies across all of these tool sets. You'll have a much deeper understanding of not only how to use them, but what they're used for. And that's when you can begin to actually make sense of the hundreds and hundreds of technologies out there without being completely overwhelmed.
That definitely makes sense. I want to dig in a little bit on that with you, Jay. As Rich had kind of described the movement and speed by which these things change and evolve, leading a team that's evaluating these on a regular basis, what kind of big wins do you see for adoption of those new and evolving technologies?
That's a great question. I'll say at the highest level, and I think all of us have worked in some traditional IT organizations. When I joined organizations that weren't doing this, you see a tremendous amount of effort, not just money, but effort being spent treading water, right? Are we patched? Are we on the current version? Are these things healthy? Or do these disks need to be replaced? I've been subscribing for quite a while to the value delivery model in IT. I want as much effort as possible delivering positive value, right? Non-value added work, even in security, is an overhead that you want to keep as low as possible using the technologies you have at your disposal. And the cloud has certainly been that for us. In my previous position, I was fortunate joining a startup and in a very early phase. We never bought a server in my entire tenure. We had one VM because we wanted to run SQL in full enterprise mode for BI and analytics. And it's the only quote unquote server we had. Everything else was running serverless and containers, Azure SQL, things like that. And the cost to do that when done well, when managed for both efficiency and value, was a tenth of the cost of traditional systems. And all of my effort went into delivering value to the customer, my business, and very little went into those peripheral activities around the edges. So the big value to me is not the magic of cost savings, but it's delivering value in your business and changing the perception of IT in your business to be more valuable than it's ever been.
So that hits on something near and dear to my heart, that changing the perception of IT and really driving that more positive outcome. So I want to transition a little bit and say, Barrett, as a business leader, you're responsible for bringing product to market, supporting it, finding customers, all of that. Where do you see these kinds of technologies playing out, and where do you see increased investment that could change your business, not just impact the cost savings that Jay talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the cloud solutions enable us to solve customer problems faster and more efficiently. So we're able to, I don't have to go develop an ML platform. There's already Azure ML or the AWS option or the GCP option. So for us, it's instead of us having to invent these platforms or reinvent the wheel, it's we go pick the wheel we want off the shelf. And those are going to continue to evolve those as time goes on much faster than I would ever be able to. And not just in ML, but we talk about message buses, we talk about delivery systems, we talk about IoT systems so we can plug in to get more value for the customer from data that they're collecting. So for us, it's really leveraging the investment that these large platforms have in all of the various technologies that we need.
That's fantastic. So when you see that investment growing and you see the changes it brings to your business, has it brought challenges with it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's, Rich talked about trying to keep up with the technology that's out there. What's the right technology? And you have to do a little bit of crystal balling to see what's the problem you're solving, how are you solving it today, and is that sustainable? And then making sure that's the right choice. That's one of the bigger ones. And the other one is the particular industries that we serve are new to the game of they're not the fastest at adopting technology. So it's changing their mindset. They're just now getting comfortable with having providing a cloud access and working with vendors that provide their solutions via the cloud, either hosting it on the cloud or more so these cloud native applications. So that's been really helping the customer get comfortable with that, and that's been probably the bigger piece. Once they're comfortable with it, they're like, okay, cool, you can now solve my problem. So that's been the bigger challenge.
And that definitely makes sense. So I want to kind of pivot it back to Rich a little bit. We talk about the challenge of companies that are trying to navigate that cloud adoption. You've seen a lot of them. What separates the ones that are able to kind of really move the needle, the ones that are able to pervasively provide that to start up and never build a server, from the ones who kind of oscillate between cloud and on-prem for what seems like almost a decade now?
Really, I've seen two things, and they really both go back to what Barrett mentioned with adopting a cloud mindset. The first thing I see is when companies begin to move to the cloud or begin to utilize the cloud, they really need to embrace the cloud. And the reason is there are some fundamental shifts in how you look at and manage control. And it can be very difficult for an IT organization to not be able to push the buttons on the machines anymore, right? And it is a fundamental mind shift as we move not just to containerization and virtualization a few decades ago, but to true serverless computing. And I think we all like to think our IT staff are the best at what they do. But we have to be able to kind of willing to ask ourselves the hard question. Are we really in the business of running data centers? And are we staffed to a point where we really do that better than the billion-dollar investments from major cloud providers? And the answer there, I think, clearly leads people to then go, okay, maybe we do need to look with a more open set of eyes. I think once you do, the next big pivot is to find out why you're moving to the cloud, right? It can be cost savings, right? Like Jay mentioned earlier. If I take a workload and I move it to the cloud, I may get some cost savings, and that's great. But companies need to really look in the mirror and say, am I doing this to have lower cost? Am I doing this to have enhanced agility to meet my business customers? Am I trying to evolve my current business process? Or am I hoping this unlocks a market or an offering that I couldn't offer with a traditional approach? And as the business and IT work together to really have that shift in not just what we're doing and should we use the cloud, but how does it change what we can do? That's where companies move from we adopted the cloud to we really changed our business because of the cloud.
So one of the pieces that comes up in that to me is as you shift those mindsets and as you take the data center kind of, do we want to be in the business of running data centers? Do we want to be in the business of kind of providing value? It also comes with a management burden that's fairly significant, right? Which is that I'm going to need to keep people skilled up on these and be able to leverage the cloud correctly and be able to kind of keep that mindset long term. So how, Jay, I put this to you, is this is a thing that you're building out in your organization. How do you keep the needed skill sets, either through internal training, recruiting? Like what's the balance there to keep people moving in the direction that is an ever-changing environment as we shift those mindsets?
Yeah, and let's just say something about both sides of that. All of the significant cloud vendors are constantly evolving their products, making announcements, pointing in a direction, and 80% of those go where they said they would, and 20% of them go away or evolve into something you didn't want. So even keeping up with what it means is challenging. I think it's, well, unless you have more money than you need, it's almost impossible to staff to that problem. You've got to seek, and I say this all the time, partners over vendors who understand this and who have made it their job to work in these environments and guide you to the part of it you need the way you need it. And I have no qualms about getting partners like Improving, and I've used them and several others, in short engagements to be sure they understand where I'm going and that they can do what I've asked, and then longer engagements once that reality is proven and get there. And that knowledge sharing and teamwork environment with your employees and those partners tends to lead to a stair-step approach to building that competency on your side and having less dependence on the partner over time. But it's an ongoing battle. You don't get over it. You don't get past it. Well, at least not cost effectively. You can buy enough resources to do it, but I would argue that you're spending more money than you should, and you're better off using your best partners in certain areas to advance your initiative and being sure you have enough internal capability to manage it day to day.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've gotten a question from the community that I'd really like to pose to both you, Jay, and to Barrett. One of the things is, how do you plan for the parlor problem when doing business in the cloud? Now, for those who kind of unfamiliar with this, Parler was kicked off of AWS's hosting with 24 hours notice because AWS disagreed with some of the stance that the platform took. And so, right, wrong, or indifferent, when we talk about engaging onto a cloud platform, we are tying our infrastructure to a company who could choose not to do business with us. How do you plan for that? Is that a black swan that you don't really plan for on the way in? Do you build for cloud agnostic, or is that just part of the risk of doing business there? So I want to start with you, Jay, and then we'll go to Barrett on the kind of the business side of that risk.
So before the Parler thing occurred, in my previous leadership position, we developed an Azure hosted platform that I had constructed specifically to be able to move it to AWS. So we chose to use no Azure specific technologies that could not migrate linearly to AWS. It took me probably 6 months to be sorry and to start unwinding some of those choices. And it was costing me maybe only a couple of $1,000s a month for those choices I made, where there was savings and speed to delivery options that were better in Azure and committing to my platform. But I would tell you, I think it's a black swan. And in the end, as you saw with Parler, they were only down 7 days. So if that is your worst case scenario, I don't think it's worth the cost, effort, pain, and confusion of staying what you intend to be agnostic. And you won't be, right? If you start out designed in agnostic, a year later you won't be. So it's almost impossible to keep. But I don't think it's worth it. That's my personal opinion.
Absolutely. Barrett?
Yeah, similar to Jay, we started off with this grandiose idea that we would be cloud agnostic and go down that road. We made it about 6 months before we realized we made a conscious decision to go down the Azure route because of the applications they have available, the speed to market, and a bunch of other reasons, that it was one of those, we're taking a calculated risk going down this road. And looking at either AWS or Azure, the organizations, what we're doing in the business. We spent some time looking at what they're tackling in our field, make sure we're not stepping on toes. We did some good analysis there, but it's for us, it's a calculated risk and one that we're willing to accept.
Yeah, and I guess I want to add maybe two little bullet points to that. The genericizing your platform, genericizing your solution on one of these platforms, you're giving up some of the advantage the platform brought you to begin with. Yeah. We are both in Azure and AWS. I don't have anything meaningful in Google today, but we chose the components from AWS and Azure that best served and fit our business problems and the solutions we sought, and we maximized that implementation to deliver the most value and minimize the cost actively, rather than trying to pretend that we could float this stuff from place to place. And unless you're going to run it in parallel in both, and again, a lot of overhead, not a lot of value, I vote you find your place and make your commitments.
That makes sense. So Rich, I saw you smirking through a lot of this, and I know you have heard a chunk of, we're going to build all Azure. We're all in for Azure, even though sometimes AWS or GCP's got a better answer in a space. You've heard, I'm totally cloud agnostic. I want to be able, at the push of a button, be on a different platform and my users never notice. And probably every variation in between. Kind of what's your guidance in this? If somebody does want to pursue one of those paths, do you coach them off of it, or do you have some rules that we could obey?
I think you coach them again to the what, right? The what are you looking at? There can absolutely be specific solutions on a given platform that are so proprietary. You are locked in, not just we have built for this platform, but we really cannot move away from it without drastic efforts and redesign. And that, I think, is a decision that has to be made with more care than are we running primarily on Amazon or AWS or GCP. So there are pieces, but I think it is equally as painful to stay so agnostic, and I think Jay put this well, that you don't actually reap the benefits of the ecosystems and platforms that these providers give you. And a lot of times that desire is almost a fallacy, because unless you were already a large company that could truly have their own data center, their own geo-replication and content distribution, you had providers and data centers and shared spaces that you're reliant on anyway. And so we've shifted our reliance, but we haven't actually become less self-reliant. And so it's, of course, something you have to plan for, and having blinders onto it is certainly not a good strategic option. But without a good balance, you either lose too much of the platforms, or you may tie yourself into a dying technology that a company doesn't continue to support. And so there is a balance in the middle.
That's a really good point. I like the kind of middle ground and balance. It doesn't seem like there's kind of staunch zealotry on either side. I do want to touch on something, we talked about this, providing speed to business and service and value to the customers and being able to move quickly. Barrett, as somebody that's responsible for setting budget and going, here's where we're spending dollars because we see disruption coming in our industry. Like, where do you see that on the horizon? And are you prepared for that? Are there pieces you're looking at that you can tell us about that you're like, hey, this is something we're seeing might be worthwhile for others?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, the ability to articulate the value of data collected is something new we're bringing to the industry. That's kind of our revolutionary piece. And so today we're doing that with some of your more traditional data science work. But kind of once we hit that low-hanging fruit, we're going to need to leverage, the ML AI portions of the world. And so to get there within our industry, they need more data. With what they've got, we can't quite do that. So it's going with our customers through that journey of collecting more data intelligently and then doing something meaningful with that. So when we look at investments, it's investments in, okay, we want to bring IoT data in. I don't need to build an IoT platform. Those two platforms have very good solutions for that. So making sure that the people that we have on our team can build solutions and leverage that quickly and be able to pivot as technology moves has been the biggest thing. So we're trying to look in that crystal ball, make sure we've got the right personnel that can address. And again, kind of to Rich's point, we're not married to a specific technology or a specific solution. It's making sure we're solving the customer's problems over time. Because if we were to talk IoT 5 years ago, that looks very different than it does today. And I'm sure it will look something very different in 5 years. So we just need smart people that can help us down that journey. And again, we're not the only ones, we're only 24 people. It's leveraging people like Improving and other people that see a much broader spectrum. We're not so egotistical as to think that our industry is leading edge and has all the great solutions. There's a lot of other industries out there that we can borrow from. And so it's using our partners and kind of their experience and the things that they've seen to tackle some of these problems. One of the things that we're doing is being able to do we're very calculation intensive application, and it's very sporadic. So we can cruise along at a baseline, and then all of a sudden, we need to ramp up and leverage the power of the cloud, ramp up, scale up, leveraging Kubernetes and Dockers to deploy, hundreds of servers, run these calculations in seconds and minutes versus some of our competitors that are hours and days, and then be able to spin those back down because I don't want to incur that huge hosting cost. And so we're not the only ones to do that. We can go look at Netflix and Facebook and other scientific applications. So that's just an example of, and that technology is going to mature. We're using Kubernetes and some things today. In 2 years, that'll look like something different. So it really is about the people keeping up with the technology.
Fantastic. So you touched on something that I really want us to dig into. It's not in the prepared comments, but it came out here. So to Jay and to Rich, Barrett talked about, like, we need more data, right? We're all probably familiar with the infamous data is the new oil, right? That it is the commodity we're all going to be chasing. And so for years, I remember the store as little as possible, store it as small as possible as the guidance, because disks were expensive, right? Hardware was expensive. And now it seems that the pendulum is on the extreme other end of store all the things. How do you balance the fact that the pendulum's probably going to swing a little bit closer to center? Or do you bank on the future value of that data and go, no, we're going to store as much as we possibly can? So Jay, I'd like to start with you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna say we're banking on the long-term value of the data, and I'm finding S3 and Azure Blob Storage and places like that you can store it a lot more efficiently at rest when I'm not using it, and move it someplace when I have a need for it. Interestingly, we've been looking at some of the perceptual computing technologies that use video and even look at your face to see where and what you're looking at recently in some very narrow single store analysis to say, can we learn enough from this to make it valuable to put in all of our stores to improve the delivery in the store? Can the system tell us when we need to take action? So we're trying some of those, and storing video is probably the biggest blob of stuff you can possibly be dragging around. But we believe it can be valuable. And so I'm taking the keep as much as I can, keep it around as long as I can, so I can compare what happened in the past to what I see happening today.
Oh, fantastic. And Rich, where do you see most people landing on this spectrum?
So I think this is actually where the technology is beginning to catch up to help us address the problem. Yeah. Because, as you said, storage used to be expensive, then storage became cheap, but data engineers still aren't cheap, right? And so I can store a bunch of data, but to do it in a way that's useful becomes very hard, very expensive, and honestly, very inflexible. But that's where the blob stores with data lakes and other scaled analytics tools that can read off of that semi-structured or unstructured data to pull out what I know I need now without throwing away or degrading the value of the things I haven't figured out I even want out of that data yet. Give organizations the balance to use the data that they can define without being so tied into having defined the whole universe ahead of time that they throw away what will be gold in 5 years when they realize we really need to train an ML model. And what we needed was that click stream or that focus data from the videos that we just couldn't make use of 5 years ago. And so I think that's where semi-structure, blob storage, like Jay mentioned, give us the ability to store cheaply, but delay the costs of engineering until a point where they become worthwhile.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. We're finding, just an anecdote, we have a project. Pinnacle's collected data from refineries for 14 years, had this stuff stored on servers. And to speed things up, become more efficient, become more accurate, we're doing a natural language processing project on some data. And so we dug up reports that were in PDFs and files that we thought we would never use. The IT guys were like, yeah, that's there just to test storage limits or whatever. And it was very, very interesting, the data, using that to train the models to pull that NLP stuff out and that's helped us, get to where we're going. So it's just a kind of an anecdote that you 5 years ago, would you have thought you would be doing that? No, but so we're big on hanging on to that data.
Awesome. So there's a question that came in that I think is pertinent here, and it frames the conversation well. We've talked about the value to the business, the cost of storage, those kind of things. And the question is, how do I get my company's leadership on board with moving to the cloud from on-prem, and who usually leads that? And so I'd like to kind of pose this to all three of you, because you bring those different perspectives. Kind of starting with you, Barrett, like, who would you want to see leading that, and what's the argument that would move you in that space as the leader of the company? It's
a business case. We're solving a valuable problem in the business case. Because if it helps me as an organization be faster, cheaper, deliver a better solution, then really kind of, I don't want to downplay the technology or the cost. That kind of really doesn't matter. Because if it's going to improve my bottom line, make me more efficient, or deliver a disruptive technology to allow me to sell more and dominate my space, then fine. Is it a cloud? Is it a pigeon? Is it a lake? I don't care what it is. That's really what's going to move it. And we've gone through that same process. We can go through different channels in the organization, but for us, the most effective has been bringing a really solid business case on the business side, to the CEO, CFO, head operating officer, from that perspective.
Fantastic. And who would you see usually leading that? Like, if it was going to be most successful, leading that change?
The CEO. I mean, it's somebody from the top down, and that's hard to get. I say that a little bit flippantly, but it's hard to get somebody at that level to buy in and say, we want to make this specific change. But that's the most effective, because it is a change management process to go through, that we're going to make a move to the cloud. And all of the things that entails, and getting everybody bought in, and having the senior leadership buy into that kind of helps drive the rest of the organization. If you can't get the CEO, then the COO or somebody else responsible for delivery of business solutions.
Fantastic. So Jay, I saw you smiling and nodding through most of that. You have anything to add to those two questions?
Well, Barrett nailed it, right? It's solving the problem the business has. At Urban Air, we couldn't afford to start our own data center. There was no way to spend that kind of money, right? So I had a cost problem that I could champion and deliver. And the CEO understood, and the CFO was my, and I'm not gonna say sponsor, I'm gonna say champion, right? The person that was backing me driving the delivery. And we had a lot of conversations about nobody bats 1,000. We're gonna do things that won't work somewhere along the way. My DBA dropped the production database in Azure one afternoon. Thank God it backs up every, whatever it was, 7 seconds. And we pushed another button, and 30 minutes later, we were back online and hadn't lost anybody's data. But, nobody bats 1,000, right? So you got to have somebody who's with you, going to back you, champion through the small bumps you go over, right? When I came here to Chuck E. Cheese, I'm in a 40-year-old company that was very happy living in 1987. And we changed management teams and new CEO. And he said, we can't be who we were and still exist in 10 years. So we're going to change the velocity of this company. And that was my mandate. If you want to go faster, I need to move this stuff into some sort of CI/CD model where I can constantly push value into the stream as you demand. And got their sponsorship, and the CMO in this case said, oh my God, it would change everything if we could change our promotions weekly instead of monthly or quarterly, right? We're now doing it pretty much monthly, but the dialing the knob is every day. And we were 2 campaigns a year before that.
Wow. And so, Rich, this hits on something that I know you and I have talked about offline a couple of times. So technologists often confuse the means with the ends when it comes to cloud migration and change inside an organization. How have you helped frame that well for the folks who see the value of the technology? They see where the world is moving, but struggle to articulate? Do you have some rules of thumb that you can go in and they can take forward if they're trying to champion this change inside their org?
Yeah, and I will say that sometimes it's as simple as getting the technologists and then the business champions, as Jay and Barrett mentioned, I think so well, on the same page by finding the places where that cool technical benefit also can be a relatively clear business strategy and driver. And I say that, the cloud allows us to think about scale in a very different way. And one of those ways is scale doesn't necessarily mean bigger. It may just mean more, right? I don't have to buy a bigger box ahead of time. I just add more as I go. And there are fundamental technical changes that the technical team can get excited about, and the business isn't going to care, right? Nor should they. What they're going to care about is the fact that I now can hit that peak that Barrett mentioned with more speed, faster delivery, and less overhead the other 80% of the time, right? And so we've got an optimization of our cost model. Utilization is a direct measurement to cost now, right? That's different. I think that Jay's example of how fast can we go from ideation to product or feature, right? And how can we democratize parts of the business to interact with IT in a way that is truly agile, not just running an agile process, but we are constantly working with and pivoting with the business and with the customer needs in real time. And I think that most technologists see the cool technology and know in their heart, this will make me do better things. But having someone bridge those two pieces, right, and translate really, I think, is key in aligning this. So unless you already have someone who's espousing that vision and leading the technology organization into that, it's really making sure you bring someone in the room to get those two pieces aligned. Because when they are, true transformation can happen. And when they're not, everyone's trying very hard, but you just don't get the alignment you need for results.
That makes sense. So you hit on something where we've got a question from the audience around what lessons have been learned around optimization? What are the situations in which you've overspent dollars, and how do they avoid falling into those pits? And I see all of you smirking, so we're going to go kind of Rich, Jay, back to Barrett. So what are those lessons, and how do they avoid those pitfalls?
I think the number one pitfall here is to think that what you did in a data center goes to the cloud and is cheaper. Because if you take what you do in a data center and you move it to the cloud, really what I can guarantee you is it's going to be slower and cost more, right? You have to change the way you look at it. I think a great example that I actually faced with a client in recent weeks was they had a process which was not well optimized, and they simply didn't care, because from the time they would get a data ingestion to the time they needed the data, it was 36 hours. So did it matter if it took 18 to process? Not really. The boxes were sitting idle otherwise. And so they had at some point made, at the time, a reasonable decision of, my development cost is more than that time, so let's just leave that as it is. But as soon as you go to a utilization model in the cloud, an 18-hour runtime is 18 times more expensive than a 1-hour runtime, right? And so suddenly you go, wait a second, that's going to cost me $60,000 a quarter. It should only cost me $8,000. There's real value in spending one more day optimizing that. And so adjusting your thoughts to my knobs are different is almost always where that happens. And I would say the best thing to do to prevent it, to the kind of original question here, monitor. When you move to the cloud, watch that daily and weekly spend. Because as Jay said, you're not going to get it right. Something's going to run away, and you're going to see that wow, my bill jumped yesterday to 10 times its norm. If you catch that in 24 hours, you fix it and it's not a big blip. If you catch it on the quarterly bill, you might have just quadrupled your IT spend, right? And so that's monitoring the spend and utilization, maybe more than actually getting it technically right, the way you prevent these technical overruns.
That makes a lot of sense. Jay, anything to add to that?
Well, I support every word Rich said. I'm aware of companies who played the lift and shift game and spent their annual budget in the first quarter, right? I've seen this happen. The best advice I got about this as I attacked it was pick somebody whose job it is to know what it costs every day. Make it someone's job. Their bonus and job effectively depends on effectively managing the cost. That has worked out in spades. I will say that the vendors have done a good job of also recognizing the runaway process, runaway cost model has a detriment to their ability to be adopted. And so you've seen Azure and other people put in budgets and management tools around this, and the scheduled on and off switches. So our dev QA environments spin up and down on schedules and are only really in existence when I need them to be in existence, right? But production, somebody has to really look at that. And there are great tools to look at that you run in your data center that tells you, if you move this into the cloud on this kind of architecture, it would cost X. And you can look at that and say, wow, that must be really inefficient because I don't understand why that would cost me $4 million. Right? And we're in that sort of hybrid mode right now. I have a data center with a bunch of servers and VMs, and I am cherry picking out the things that are most valuable, mission critical, business value delivery to clean and move, right? Some of it's been easy and others required a lot of cleaning, let's just say it that way, refactoring work went into making it suitable to live somewhere else. Because when you own the box and you don't care if it's running at 90% CPU all day, not a big deal. If you're going to pay for it by the minute over here, it's a huge deal. So I'll leave it at that.
It definitely kind of hits some of those long-term trends of, oh, just throw more CPU at it. That if I own the data center, that's a cheap answer.
And computer cheap, right?
Yeah, hardware is cheap. I've heard it for years now, unless it's not my hardware. So Barrett, what you were kind of nodding and smirking. It sounds like you've got some stories to share in this space too.
Oh yes, as we're building software, developers love to, I want the biggest, fastest, highest tiered thing I can get, because I want to, the faster I can compile, the more things I can do, the more changes, more. And that's not always the case. We could get into war stories about making sure you're choosing the right application, the right server level, the right service level, and all those pieces. And Jay hit the nail on the head. It's having somebody that looks at that. Well, somebody that understands that, and somebody that looks at that really pays attention. We had a spike where we thought we were doing something really, really cool. And it was, we did some really cool calculations, but it cost us an additional $20,000 a day. We only did that calculation once. So again, had we not been looking at that, multiply that out times a quarter, and I probably wouldn't be here. But we have people looking at that kind of stuff, and it's understanding. And it's a challenge to find somebody because of, the top three and the complexity and the things that they offer. It takes somebody that understands that. So it's either finding a partner that understands that license structure and how to look at that, or really heavily investing in somebody, because that will dramatically pay dividends.
Awesome. So there was another comment that came in here around the pros and cons of having a hybrid strategy. I know Jay mentioned that he's currently in that hybrid space. So both from an infrastructure and a developer side, what have you seen as like the good and the bad, and kind of any recommendations on that? We'll start with you, Rich.
So I'm actually a huge proponent of hybrid strategies, and I think that long term hybrid is really what's here to stay, right? The cloud is a solution that is a better solution for many pieces of products. Personally, I would never want my office printers to have to run through the cloud, right? It's just not an efficient or easy to manage solution. There are absolutely some things, there are some data loads that I may still want or need to keep on premise, right? There are a number of customers I have who still have mainframe systems, right? Moving their mainframe to the cloud is a different question than the rest of their business systems. Hybrid is a great solution to give them that mix. From a developer standpoint, I think hybrid is also a great solution, and really in current times, because if you were a true hybrid organization in 2019, then remote work in 2020 probably came pretty smoothly. And if you weren't, it might not, right? And there are a number of organizations that treated the cloud as if it was on premise. Right? They made direct ties to their office and data center. And unless you were in that one spot in the middle of Tennessee, you still couldn't do everything. And if you're having to drive somewhere to access your cloud, you're probably doing it wrong. And that is where I think hybrid is the right answer. But hybrid has to be a true hybrid that leverages the benefits of both, not shoehorns one into the other's model.
I think I've just found my favorite quote of the day. If you have to drive to your cloud, you're doing it wrong. How about you, Jay?
So I'm gonna give it a couple of caveats. I think that there are certain workloads that you don't like printing, that you're just not going to move into my file's going to go up to Google and come back around through the internet to my printer. I'm not doing that, right? But I guess I'm a person who wants to get rid of as much of my data center and possibly all of it if possible. There are sometimes very specific problems that call for owning your own hardware, or just the cost of owning your own hardware is absolutely cheaper than the cloud. And in those cases, I have no argument. I guess for me, I agree with Rich. Hybrid is here to stay. Data centers are dead, just like COBOL's dead, right?
Except for the billions of lines still running.
Going to have some needs, right? And maybe not all companies, maybe not everybody, right? But there are problems that it's the appropriate solution for. I'm going to argue in my company, which has 700 restaurants around the United States and Canada and another 100 franchises overseas, the cloud's a better solution for me. I'm better off not having a data center. And so my goal is to get there and resolve the remaining immovable objects that I have, and get the vendors or my internal teams to make those movable objects. But that's a individual company thing, not a strategy, in my opinion, a broad strategy.
Makes sense. How about you, Barrett?
So as a solutions provider, we're going as a cloud solution. However, probably 20% of our customers have some sort of on-prem application and on-prem data that we're going to have to interact with. So it's not so much as that we can go be deployed on-prem. With some of our overseas customers, we may have to leverage some of the, an in-country data center to run our application. That's a great lever we can pull. But by and large, we're going to run in the cloud, and then just make sure we have the right tools and capabilities to interact with their on-prem systems. These large companies, they treat their operations data, that's their financial data, that's their gold, that's their proprietary, that's their IP. So they're going to hang on to that and what they feel is the best manner for them. So who am I to tell them how to do it? I just want access so we can help add value to it.
Awesome. So I think what I'm hearing is the big risk to avoid for the hybrid cloud is using it as an excuse to not have an opinion. But having an opinion, but being pragmatic when to differ is kind of the overarching guidance.
Yes.
Awesome. So I do want to kind of pivot to the last question I had for Rich, and then I've saved a nice juicy one from the audience that we'll kind of wrap up with. So Rich, what are the most common issues you've seen? Like the ones that almost everybody steps into, and how do they avoid them so that the road's just a little bit smoother?
I think we've hit, if I had kind of 3 lessons learned, right? I think we've actually hit on 2 of them pretty well, right? Change the way you think. Lift and shift is not a cloud strategy, right? Secondly, utilization matters directly. It costs you money to be inefficient once you're in the cloud. And so I think that's, we've also talked about that well. The third, though, is just because the cloud can democratize how you provision and administer IT, and can put a lot more power in the hands of your developers to do things very quickly, doesn't mean you want to. Because we all want agility, but we also need governance. You need manageability and you need security. And the answer to that in the cloud space is that DevOps is more important now, not less, because I can do things faster, because I can do things in a more flexible way. Doesn't mean I need less administration and less automation. It means I simply need smarter automation and smarter management to keep this in something that in 5 years we can continue to manage and isn't a sprawl that we then look back on and go, what type of beast have we created now? And can we ever climb out of this hole?
Absolutely. So I've got a question kind of for all of you, in that we'll start with Jay and then Barrett and kind of wrap up on Rich here. What are the metrics you've used to measure the success of cloud migration? Like when you decide to move something, what are those metrics? If I'm going to be on the listening side.
I'm going to channel Barrett right off the bat and say the metrics that you are publicizing should be about the business problem you took on. I am publicizing metrics about time to market from idea at the senior leadership meeting to delivery in public. And some of those are 31 days, 18 days, 9 days. Those are metrics everybody can go, wow, we thought of this on Tuesday and the next Friday it was out. That's awesome, right? That's what my business cares about right now. I'm still managing a budget and sit down with the CFO every month and talk about, hey, that bubble I predicted as I migrate this stuff out of my data center is arriving now. I'm going to spend $3,000 or $4,000 a month because my data center cost is fixed, whether we use it or not. And this thing is flexible. But I will whittle this thing down and get rid of some costs in the data center, and they will fall off in five and six figure numbers, right? As I go, oh yeah, we're dropping that rack. So my cost goes in half, right? That kind of stuff. But choosing the metrics, I'll give you this. It has to fit on one page to be the executive summary, and the metric needs to be digestible by humans, not geeks. If you're doing those two things, people will pay attention.
Absolutely. Barrett, anything to add?
Not really. I mean, it's about the business and the business drivers and the value. For us, it's, are we saving the money that we said we would save? Are we hitting the uptime metrics and the availability metrics? Another good one that we like to track is usage. Are your people and our people actually using the application? And so, Jay, to your point, there's executive loves dollars and people counts. So it really makes it, there are 4 big bubbles on the screen, and that way we can very quickly tell, are we up, are we down, how things are going. And then on the financial side, we have a lot of other metrics. How are we trending with our on the financial side? Are we meeting our budget, and how are those things working and bringing value? But yeah, it really is tying it back to the business to make sure you're solving the problems and bringing value to your customer.
Fantastic. Rich, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think it matters how mature your IT organization and your organization in general are. If IT is still just a cost center to you, I think that metric probably is spend, right? And you're looking for that 3 or 4% decrease, and you've got to plan for that overlap time that Jay talked about. But the more your IT organization is part of your company's innovation, the more they're tied to your business, the more those metrics change. And I think one of the reasons Jay and Barrett are so great in a forum like this is because both of them immediately think, if we don't generate business metrics, we're not working close enough with the business. And I think that's where everyone should be. I think if you can't get there, it doesn't mean you don't go to the cloud, right? You still probably do this as part of your maturization, but there's other process steps you need to integrate IT in your organization. So, kudos to both of those guys for obviously running, right, organizations that are tied in the way that makes IT a true driver of success.
So before we wrap up, there was one late question that came in that I think, Jay, you've got a great perspective to answer this. I've heard that it's hard to remain agile while doing a cloud migration due to the nature of the work of moving things to the cloud. Is this true? And how can we retain an agile strategy while approaching a cloud transformation?
It's a great question. The process of moving we just took, so I'll just preface it with a quick story. During Snowmageddon, our data center was down for the entire time because our network provider had a substation outside the data center that didn't have a generator or couldn't get diesel or whatever the problem was. Anyway, down for 3 days. Total loss of revenue on a key platform that we use. And we migrated that out last week to Azure and are running it in Azure today. So we solved that problem over the course of a month. That did not stop development. It added new tasks, and we did some optimization to make the things we analyzed early perform well as we came out to Azure. But we went right on with our CI/CD strategy, and I will tell you the cloud has sped it up. When I did this at Urban Air, we ran a 5-month Scrum project with 2-week sprints. After we'd been in production for 2 sprints, we went to Kanban and started delivering 20 times a week, Monday through Thursday. It made us more agile, more fast. And the hardest part of it, and Rich hit it right on the nose, is you have to be smarter about what you're doing quickly. Defects got fixed as soon as possible. Features had a toggle that said they can go out dynamically at whenever they're done, or they have to go out as a release because some communication to our end users or our internal customers or other people has to accompany that software release. And so we had 3 types of packaging: ASAP, feature scheduled, but at any time it can be scheduled, and then packages that had to go out together. I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic. So it sounds like as long as you're approaching it with an agile mindset and planning for it, you can stay agile all the way through.
I think you can get better.
Awesome. So I do want to conclude today, and I'd like to get each of your perspective on where you believe things are heading. In the past several years, we've heard everything from the cloud is a bubble to on-premise is dead. So let's start with just kind of a general, what do you think the future looks like for cloud technologies, adoptions? Do we stay the big 3, or which is really the big 2 plus Google? Or do we end up with hundreds of cloud providers that each have their niche? Like, what are your thoughts? Starting with you, Barrett, where do you think we're headed?
So my little crystal ball, it's a little fuzzy. I see we could put kind of some time frame on it. We look at the next, say, 10 years. I think you're going to see the big 2 stay, because they're making investments that companies are very comfortable with, and they can see that it's something it's stable. You know, very large oil and gas company is not going to jump on something that showed up yesterday or 2 days ago. They're going to want somebody that's got some track record and has some runway with them. So I think the big 2 are here to stay to solve a majority of your problems. And I think you're going to see more and more people move to the cloud native type applications, with more and more, from what we're seeing on our side, is the hybrid cloud is not necessarily, there's some of it for your traditional IT pieces, but you're going to see more data collection in the field and with some aggregation and some intelligence. So you're going to see some of your smarter edge devices be deployed and moving all that data to the cloud for the heavy lifting. So that's what that looks like. That's moved around in the last 5 years, and that's going to move around in the next 5 to 10. But that's what we see, and that's kind of what we're planning for from a rough perspective.
You're on mute, Devlin.
It was going to happen at least once during this. So how about you, Jay? Where do you see is your crystal ball any less fuzzy? Where are we going?
Well, I agree. I think that Rich's hybrids here to stay is true for a lot of companies. I think that making absolutely sure you've made the right choice with what you keep in your own fence and what you put in the cloud is necessary. You know, our company's already on Workday and other cloud platforms. It is my intent to not buy another server for our data center ever. What we own will expire, and as it does, I will move it somewhere else. I will say, I think that there are some niche players, IBM Watson, there are some other people not in the conversation today that I think are meaningful and are looking for opportunities to grow their footprint in the right way. I think we'll continue to see competition, but it's going to take people with the kinds of leverage Jeff Bezos has or Alphabet has to move the ball in this space for sure. So they've got to get serious.
Absolutely. And Rich, we'll wrap up with you. What's the future look like?
I think we see more and more interoperability between the platforms. I think that we've seen great movement there in the last 3 years. I think that continues. I think the bigger cloud revolution actually comes from organizations themselves becoming more agile. Because as we finally move to core finance, ERP, and manufacturing systems moving to the cloud, and you no longer have a 20-year lifespan on a product, I think we're going to have to see organizations become more agile. And I think that may really be kind of the next revolution we see from the cloud, is the impact that moving to that type of technology has on kind of that definition of your core business.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Barrett, Jay, Rich, for taking the time and sharing the stories. Thank you, everybody, for being online. The video for this will get published, I believe, tomorrow morning. And we are all done here with some great conversations. Thank you, everybody.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all.